after going through an ayahuasca ceremony, what's happened to your brain is it's actually created new neural plasticity. And so to create change in your life and to add things in or take things away actually becomes easier. We're not in these stuck grooves the way that we were before.
Welcome back to Heal Your Roots podcast. On today's episode, we have Alex Mayrin, plant medicine practitioner and guide. In this episode, we explore how ayahuasca can help heal and treat PTSD, trauma, and childhood wounds. If this is something you've been suffering with and traditional therapy has not helped, you're definitely going to want to listen to today's episode. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share. Alex, thank you so much for being on with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, Alex, whatever you feel comfortable sharing, but can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this space?
Yeah. So, after, in my early 20s, I was in the military, struggled with, depression, PTSD, anger issues, the typical kind of veteran issues. Um, and after years of trying different therapy, different therapists, group therapy, nothing seemed to quite touch what my issues were. It wasn't getting to the root of my issues. So, um, I don't know. I happened to be watching a documentary, and in this documentary, it had mentioned ayahuasca. I work with ayahuasca primarily, um, and something pinged my interest. They had mentioned something along the lines of like veterans, PTSD, ayahuasca, and that's all I took away from the documentary. It was shortly thereafter that a friend of mine had mentioned ayahuasca to her brother-in-law, and he was like, "Oh, I know where, you can do that." And so it was maybe 3 weeks or so since I watched the documentary, and I found myself in an ayahuasca ceremony. Um, yeah, so that's how it all began. Um,
Yeah.
was searching for something that could actually help. Um, and I was willing to do something completely out of the ordinary. I didn't have any friends that had worked with plant medicine. I really had no idea what I was getting into, but I was hopeful that it would work.
Yeah. And it's tough because I know that especially with PTSD, right? It's in your nervous system, it's your body. You can't really talk your way out of it, right? Because it's like these instinctual feelings and symptoms that you go through. So I imagine after trying all of these things and really wanting to feel better and increase your quality of life, leaning into plant medicine is I guess like the next thing. And I really believe in plant medicine too. So it seems like it really worked for you. So I'm glad that that's the path that you were able to take. And now you're here helping all these other people with it too.
Thank you. Yeah, it really changed my life. Um, that first weekend, it was like a weekend retreat. I ended up drinking ayahuasca 3 times over the course of a few days. And, the biggest thing that happened that weekend was I found hope.
Hmm.
So it's not like a magic bullet, it's not a quick fix. Um,
Yeah.
but that first retreat really allowed me to see myself um, in a way that I hadn't in a very long time.
It sounds really powerful.
Yeah, it was. And just feeling into that now, it still gets me a little choked up, you know.
Yeah.
It's life changing.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that because I know it's personal and it's vulnerable. So thank you for being open to share that with me. And so what was kind of the journey between you doing it for yourself to find that healing to then now helping other people through this process?
It was a long journey. Initially I would go, I would drink ayahuasca. I started incorporating yoga, and meditation, and breath work. outside of the ceremonies, and my life just started to shift and change. I'd go and I would drink ayahuasca, then there'd be a period of time where I wouldn't, and so on and so forth. And as it just continued to unfold, eventually I started coming to ceremonies and I would help out. I'd walk people to bathrooms, I'd, change out buckets, things of that nature. And over time, like, I started working with a lot of other veterans, and eventually that led me to going to Peru for the first time.
Mm.
And so I'd be drinking ayahuasca sometimes, I'd be helping out others, so on and so forth. But eventually, I found my way to Peru, and I did what's called a master plant dieta, which is it's a form of isolation in a little hut, um, with no distractions, um, nothing to do. You can journal, you can sing, you can play music if you play an instrument, but basically you're sitting in a hut with nothing to do, a very strict food diet, where there isn't salts, oils, spices, very bland food. And then every other day you drink ayahuasca, you leave your hut, it's called a tambo, and you go to a maloca, and in there is a ceremony, the ayahuasca ceremony. And, go through the ceremony. The next morning, you go back to your hut. And on the days where you're not drinking ayahuasca, you're actually drinking the tea of a different plant. And these different
Mm.
plants work on you know, different things, physically, energetically. Um, and so one day is ayahuasca, one day is the other plant. And it was through this first dieta that I'd gone to the jungle, and I was a carpenter, builder, different things. And during the course of this dieta, um, it was absolutely the most terrifying, difficult thing I've ever experienced in my life.
Mm.
But what it was is, um, it was working on humbling myself. It was so difficult, and and it was just humbling. It was the most humbling experience of my life, this 10-day dieta. And at the end of the dieta, I was in an ayahuasca ceremony, and I was getting these visuals of what to do when I left. In the ceremony, I felt completely humbled heart, and I felt relief. Like I couldn't surrender my suffering. My suffering was still there. I could accept my suffering, but it was still there. And so all that was left was to let it humble you. And it was after this humbling experience in this journey, I started to get visuals, like this actual vision of what to do when I left Peru. I saw myself teaching a yoga class. I'm a yoga teacher
Mm.
at this point. I was like, all right, I'll teach the class. And then it showed me teaching breath work. And I was like, all right, I'll teach breath work. And then I saw myself actually serving ayahuasca. And I was just
Mm.
like, okay, like I'll do it. And I'll kind of fast forward. Uh, Upon returning home, I reached out to all of my clients that I had construction projects for. I let them know that I was getting out of the business, and um, I started working with an attorney to set up a church. I figured out how to import the raw materials, and I just began. I started serving ayahuasca to people that I knew, um, small groups, one person here, two people there, and it just started to grow. Um, the word of mouth spread. I ended up meeting more people, and the group started to just build, the group sizes, and I'm coming up on 2 years of doing that now, on my own. So been a beautiful
That's
journey,
incredible.
and I left out a lot of details to keep it short, but um, yeah, that's a journey. It began with just needing support, and then coming back and starting to support people, and then eventually stepping out fully on my own.
Mm, that's incredible. That's really powerful story. And I feel like that happens a lot with healers or therapists or any kind of practitioner that is in service to help other people, is that we're kind of looking for something for ourselves in the beginning, and we find something that helps or transforms us along the way, and then we want to share that. And it sounds like you started to build a community. Like you met this community of people who were doing the same thing, and then now you built your own, which is awesome. That's really powerful.
It's been an incredible ride. So very
It
honored
is.
to be able to be doing this work.
Yeah, it's deep work. It sounds very deep and transformational, and a lot of people, I'm sure, are very vulnerable and raw and open around you. So it takes a lot of trust, I'm sure,
Mm.
in you and in the ceremony and the process to, allow someone to open themselves up like that.
Yeah, it all begins with a phone call, so whether somebody, through word of mouth, hears about me or, Tikkun, which is a center that I helped open up with a couple of partners and my wife. And it starts with a phone call. And I'm not on a phone call to interview anybody. I really just, to
Mhm.
touch base with them and to make that first
Mhm.
connection. And so I would say usually when people come to ayahuasca, it's it's at the point in their life where they're willing to step outside of what we view as like traditional mental health. So there's something there, so just picking up the phone and calling somebody that they've never met, that can be very intimidating and vulnerable. So that
Mhm.
kind of vulnerability piece begins at that first connection, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's really really quite special. Um, then I meet them for the first time as they show up for like a weekend retreat, and being able to witness this process of the moment I talk to them to the moment they show up, to the first ceremony, then the day after, and
Mhm.
there's yoga and there's breath work, and then another ceremony. And by the time they leave, it's like the lights are back in their eyes. It's like this haze, this kind of gray haze has been cleared, and they're bright, and their heart is full, and they're open, and sharing and feeling deeply. And it's really just a beautiful, beautiful experience to be able to witness that process in others and to be able to hold a container for that type of healing to occur.
Yeah. That is really beautiful. And so, for a lot of people who have either never heard of ayahuasca or maybe have just heard of it, can you kind of share what it is so they have an idea for listeners? Right, we've been talking about, I think they're kind of getting an idea. It's plant medicine,
Hmm.
you take it, all of this wild stuff happens. But if you can share a little bit more detail about what it is and kind of what a ceremony looks like.
Yeah, I can do that. So, what it is, it's a psychedelic, um, but it's not like acid or mushrooms. It can have similarities, but it's brewed into a tea. It's made from two plants, the ayahuasca vine and the leaves of the chacruna bush, and it's brewed into a tea. Could take anywhere from 26 to 30 hours to brew a batch. Um, and so it's dark color. It's kind of thick, you know.
Oh.
It's very earthy flavored. Anyway, you drink the tea at the beginning of the ceremony, and anywhere from like 30 minutes to an hour can go by, depending on somebody's sensitivity level. Um, they'll start to feel sensations in their body. They might start to feel tingling. They might start to get visuals. They might feel nauseous. emotions might, the feeling tone of emotion might start bubbling up in their body. And,
Yeah.
the ceremony was typically, around 5 hours. Now it could be 8, it could be 3. Everybody's body is going to metabolize it differently. And it also depends on how many cups you drink. So if you just take
Mm.
the first cup at the beginning and you're deep in it and you don't want any more, it's probably going to err on the side of 4 hours. If you take a second cup, partway through, or a third cup, obviously it can be extended. Um,
Mm.
so, what happens? It's different for everybody. But what typically happens is people will move through emotions, they'll move through fears, anxieties, they'll start to process and gain clarity on their life. Um,
Mhm.
on a physical level, a lot of people purge.
Yeah.
That's a very common one, purging in the form of either vomiting or needing to use the bathroom. But the purge can also be crying, sweating, kind of
Mm.
shaking, like almost vibrating, yawning.
Yeah.
This is just like it's energy leaving the body. Now, I'm sure a lot of the listeners have read or heard about the book The Body Keeps the Score, right?
Yeah.
And so like how does trauma affect the body and how is it stored? Well, ayahuasca
Mm.
can go in and start to shake that energy up
Mm.
to allow it to move. Um, and so that's the purge. They may be going through a mental process of something in childhood or something like that, and then all of a sudden they might start to feel nauseous. And so the
Mm.
mental process with the nausea is allowing this energy of this traumatic childhood event to actually like up and leave the body as they're
Wow.
processing it mentally and feeling it as they're processing.
Wow. So it's like literally dislodging where it's stuck energetically and physically in your nervous system. And I mean, with trauma, right? Like everything is disconnected, and it sounds like this connects everything, shakes it up, moves it, and then releases in whatever way your body sees that it needs to be released.
It can be that way. Yes. It's not always.
Wow.
That's just, you know, um,
Mm-hmm.
but oftentimes, yes, it's showing up as a form of a purge or something like that. For some people, they may never actually vomit. Um,
Mm-hmm. The lucky ones. No.
it depends on how you view that,
Sure.
um, but either way, you'll go through a mental, emotional process.
Hmm.
Of whatever's inside of you, whether it be in your subconscious mind or trauma that's stored in your body. Um, yeah, there's a process that you go through over the course of this, let's just say 4 to 6 hours. Um, and during the process, it's not always painful. Maybe towards the end, you'll start to feel these emotions of like gratitude and love and compassion for yourself and gentleness towards yourself. And those types of feelings are hard to feel in our body when there's so much other stuff happening. And so when you've gone through this process of like moving these things that are no longer needed or they're just stored there, it allows you to actually feel more yourself um, than before. So, uh, as we move through life, we're just kind of like storing things in our subconscious, storing things in our body, and this process of like kind of peeling all these layers back, you can get back to the root of like who you are, like before the world told you who you are.
So imagine you walk in one way and come out a very different. experience. And I don't know if it's person, because you're saying this is all of these layers being placed and now they're being taken off, but it sounds like an actual weight lifted off of you, like mentally, emotionally, energetically, physically, right? Like on all these different layers is just released off of you. And I'm sure there's this feeling of lightness, is what it sounds like.
Yeah. So a person can be really physically exhausted at the end of a weekend
Mhm.
or
Sure.
at the end of a retreat. Um, but there's the overall feeling of like upliftedness and lightness and clarity. Um, the thing about it is like there's always going to be more, right? So
Hmm.
after one weekend, you might have just scratched the surface, You may have just found hope. You may have found hope or compassion or gratitude. Um, but everyone has their own journey. So yes, you feel incredibly light. Um, but it's not the cure all, right? So then in
Yeah.
comes integration, in comes allowing the pieces to settle and really nourishing your nervous system because it can be a lot. It can be a lot to move through all of that in one weekend. And so to find this place of like steadiness after, um, it's really like finding a new way of being. And that takes time and integration, finding a therapist or a coach or a guide or somebody that understands trauma, um, you know trauma sensitive, trauma mindfulness, um, but working with somebody that can actually help you integrate um, what it was you just went through to make lasting changes, because we can go through an experience like this, but then we're going back home. We're going back home to the
Hmm.
same things that were there when we left. So you've changed, but your life didn't change overnight. And so
Hmm.
it's taking maybe what we've learned over the weekend or retreat or ceremony, whatever it is, and applying small changes to our life. Maybe adding in different practices. Maybe if you didn't have a meditation practice, maybe trying that. If you haven't spent time in nature, maybe trying that. So integration can look different for everybody. Somebody with a type A personality, if you give them a list of things to do for after the retreat, you're like, all right, now do this, 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 and this. They're taking notes and they're like, all right, I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna, and
Yeah.
and and so maybe that's actually the mechanism that they went there to work on. And so if you give them this
Mm.
list, now it's like they're back in this overcomer, like this, I'm going to overcome myself by doing
Mm.
this thing, when really what maybe they needed to learn was how to be gentle with themselves. And so it's like somebody like that with a type A personality that's a real go-getter, like that served them probably pretty well in life, as
Yeah.
far as jobs and having their life put together, but internally, like they're not okay. And
Yeah.
so to actually learn how to then be gentle with yourself is going to be far more important than like giving them a list of things to like go and do, to make it last. Um, if that makes sense, how I worded that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
It just depends on every person, right? It's customized, it's catered to the individual, what makes sense for them.
right. It's different for
So I have a
everybody.
Yeah, I have a question. So you mentioned when you went to Peru, there was this type of ceremony where you were kind of isolated and then in the ceremony with a group over a course of time.
Hmm.
And then I'm hearing you say there's weekends and there's retreats. Can you share or elaborate a little bit about the difference of if someone's just doing it for one sitting, right? Like the 4 to 8 hours versus a couple of days in a row? Like how would someone make that decision based on that?
I like to suggest people doing like a weekend retreat, because,
Hmm.
you know, in that context, in that container, they can actually have support. They can maybe try yoga for the first time or meditation or breath work. And so the whole container, like a Friday to Sunday, is going to have two ceremonies. The first one, it can be, especially if you're a first timer, you've never worked with ayahuasca before. The first time can kind of be
Yeah.
like, what? Like, what's even happening? You're getting to you're kind of just getting your bearings about you.
Yeah.
It could be really deep, um, a really deep experience. But then if like you've never done anything like this before, and the next morning you just up and leave, there isn't a lot of time for the experience to continue to unfold. So then, if that first ceremony is Friday night, and you wake up Saturday morning, you're chatting with all of these other people that had their experiences, and you're all opening up, and you feel this
Mm.
deep sense of connection with people because you all just went through this, you know.
Yeah.
And you might open the day with a mindful yoga or meditation or something like that,
Hmm.
followed by breakfast and continued sharing, and maybe a structured sharing group where each person actually gets the opportunity to share as much or as little, as they feel comfortable sharing. And so it's like all of these layers just keep getting peeled back and like tapping into the vulnerability of like connection and feeling like this deep intimacy, right, with other people. And it's it continues to unfold, and all the layers keep getting peeled back. And then maybe Saturday afternoon you do a breath work, um, which is going to keep peeling back these layers. And maybe some downtime in the afternoon leading up to a Saturday evening ceremony. So now you've just gone through like 24 hours of not just an ayahuasca ceremony, but deep connection with other people. You've experienced yoga, you've done breath work, and now you're just like open, and now you're about to drink ayahuasca again. And so
Oh
the
wow.
depth that you'll go is going to be completely
Mm.
different than that first
The
time.
first night.
So I do believe, for people looking for ayahuasca, or looking into it, one ceremony is going to be better than none, right? So for some
Sure.
people, they can't commit to a full weekend or a full retreat. Um, and so it's still better to come to a ceremony, have a conversation the next morning, you know, um, give a little bit of tools and practices that they can take home with themselves. Um,
Hmm.
that's still going to be better than not doing it at all, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Other people may challenge me on that, and that's fine. um, so yeah, sometimes we will do just like a single night ceremony or a single ceremony during the day, and you know, at the end of it, people can go. Um, but the multiple days allows for this container to stretch, which, I think is really important for people. Um, we live such busy lives, and you talk to many people, and you start to realize that like everyone's walking around on fumes. Their nervous systems are shot. They're stressed to the max. We've got bills, we've got kids, we've got jobs, we've got so much going on that we never actually like slow down and see what's happening. We're just piling it all on. And so in a weekend, it allows you to like shed some of that, unplug from your day-to-day life and really focus on you. And I think that's what a lot of people lack in our society is spending time on themselves in the inner work arena. And and so the weekend retreat really allows for people to like really open up and sit down with their caring.
Mm. So it sounds like stages, right? I love this. So it's like the first day is like you don't even know what the hell's gonna happen, right? Like who knows what's gonna come up for you. And then everyone's in this open space and you're primed and you're building off of that and continuing kind of optimizing on this like energy and openness. And then next night it's like, all right, let's go to the next level, like a little bit deeper. And you kind of know what to expect, at least a little bit, like what you might experience or feel or see. And now you're, you've connected with some of these people around you. So there's this little bit layer of feeling more comfortable and safe,
Hmm.
and then you go deeper, right? Because I'm sure there's some resistance at first with anything, right?
Oh
Even
yeah,
if we want to try something to help, there's naturally going to be resistance in the beginning. But once you've cracked through that first layer, it's like a little bit more open. You were even saying like surrendering and being more humble to this next stage of clarity or healing.
yeah.
Sounds awesome.
It's incredible. Uh, it's really incredible. I will say that people are typically more nervous the second night because they've touched into,
That's true.
oh, oh, this we're actually going somewhere deep within ourselves.
Mm,
But they
yeah.
but they've been doing the work throughout the day, and you kind of build this, we're all in this together, you know. And so even though you may be more nervous about the experience itself, you do feel
Yeah.
more comfortable with the people you're with. You know, you've built a little bit more trust with the facilitators, and
Hmm.
and so even though you may be more nervous about the experience, you ultimately
Yeah.
feel more trust in the process. So it's,
Hmm.
as you're learning these kind of learning how to surrender, learning the art of surrender, what does that even mean? It's like people
Yeah.
can go, I'm gonna surrender. And it's like I'm gonna do it's like that right there. You don't go accomplish surrender. Like you can't you know you can't force it.
Yeah.
So like really starting to learn what surrender is. And then it allows you to accept some of the things, right? You start to accept it. You start to become humbled by life. You start to feel gratitude for life. It's all of these stages. Trust, learning to trust yourself again, um, trusting other people. There's so many layers to this work, and it's all happening like in real time for people.
Wow. Sounds very, very intense.
It is.
I mean, it's kind of what, people are signing up for, right? Is that if all these other treatment methods haven't worked that take a lot of time and there's a lot of suffering along the way and there's incremental, I guess, progress, this is like all at once, right? It's whole body, whole spirit, energy, mind, everything. And you're like really being engulfed in this. Like it sounds terrifying and also very freeing and liberating. And it's like, the human condition is always like this contradictory
Mhm.
experience. So it makes sense why it would be like kind of on both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah. It's, I go back to like my own personal journey with it. Traditional therapy, like nothing was actually getting to the roots of what it was. I thought my life was messed up because I was in the military. Well, it turns out these beliefs that I had about myself that were stored in my subconscious, those came into play when I was a child. The military and my life just made those things bigger. Uh, and so we can actually start to see ourselves for who we really are, right? So, you know, it was my experience with traditional therapy, throughout my 20s, that like most of the conversation was just trying to figure out what the issues were. Like it took all of this like digging to even like find out
Yeah.
what was happening so you could address
Yeah.
it. Now,
Mhm.
ayahuasca is going to just bring you there. So now you can
Yeah.
address it. Now you can feel what it is you need to feel. You can process the things that you weren't able to process. And then when you couple that in with therapy, you couple that in with, spending more time in nature or meditation, or prayer, whatever your practices are, um, the healing and growth occurs at such a deep level that your life begins to change rather drastically, quickly. So, yeah.
There's like a part of me that really wants to do it, and the other part is like terrified.
And I get that. Um,
Yeah.
you're seeing yourself, and
Mhm.
that's scary to people, to see yourself and feel
Yeah.
maybe. Yeah, we live our lives like in resistance to feeling pain or suffering, that we try to distract
Sure.
ourselves until the suffering can become so heavy that maybe people turn to whatever their coping mechanism is, drugs, alcohol, sex, you name it, like
Mhm.
food, work, like all of that. Eventually,
Yeah.
people get to the point where you can't outrun it anymore. It's there.
Mhm.
And now you actually have to feel through it and process what's causing it. That doesn't mean you're going to relive, uh, uh, a traumatic event necessarily, but the feelings of, not being safe in your body, or whatever it is, you're going to move through the feelings, and that's scary to people. Like, I've lived my whole life trying not to feel this. Why am I diving into feeling? I'm adequately numb. It's like, but you're here. So
Yeah.
let's peel back the layers, see what's going on, feel what needs to be felt,
Mhm.
and come back to your heart, you know?
Mhm. Sounds really powerful.
Yeah.
And so I know you mentioned a lot about integrating afterwards, right? Like this event is like it gets you right there. You're feeling it, you're observing, you're healing, and then you return back, right? And like that's kind of even in therapy, right? Like when you work on yourself and you go back to the place that either conditioned you to believe certain things or you're doing certain things that are continuing to harm you, how do you help people create some of those practices or integrate that a little bit more if you are the coach that they want to continue seeing?
Integration is such a loaded question. You can ask many different people, what is integration? And what are integration tools? And you'll hear many different things, you know. And so depending on the individual, like it really depends like what they moved through, what they're working on.
Yeah.
But the question of like how to support someone,
Hmm.
my go-to is like start a daily practice, whatever that is, whether that's meditation, or yoga, or walking in nature. Like do something every day. At least try. If it doesn't
Hmm.
work out every day, at least try to implement it a little bit throughout the week. After going through an ayahuasca ceremony, what's happened to your brain is it's actually created new neuroplasticity. And so to create change in your life and to add things in or take things away actually becomes easier. We're not in these stuck grooves the way that we were before. So it's the perfect opportunity to implement little things, whether it's, a 5 minute or 10-minute meditation, or, spending more time in nature, or doing something that like fills your cup, whatever that is. Um, I will go back to it and say that like I believe personally the best thing that people can do is really to learn how to be gentle with themselves. Oftentimes we grew up and adults weren't gentle with us. We've all heard stories, children are to be seen, not heard, like all of the stories. And so, we're being rushed around, the parents have schedules, and it's like a child isn't like in time like adults are, right? They're just
Yeah.
in playtime. And so when we're rushing them around, it's like They start to get anxious, whatever it is. So
Mm.
parents, I'm a parent myself, and I've caught myself not being gentle with my children. Like, come on, hurry up, we got to get going to school, right?
Yeah.
And so like when we can learn how to reparent ourselves and be gentle with ourselves the way that, we would have liked our parents to be, like, I think that's one of the highest forms of love that you can have. Is like to just be gentle with yourself. Now people go, what does that look like?
I was about to ask you if you could share an example.
Yeah. So this is where, you're kind of plugging in some of the skills that you've learned with ayahuasca. Surrender, acceptance. Maybe if you're, really hurried and you're really anxious, like just stop and like take some deep breaths, like and feel. Like you're allowed to feel, right? So oftentimes as a parent, I can speak from my own experience, right? I'm a stickler for time for whatever reason. I'm not going to go into it, but probably because I wasn't being gentle as a child when it was time to get somewhere. So
Yeah.
when I'm getting close to the time where I'm supposed to get somewhere, like I start to get a little anxious. Not so much now,
Yeah.
but like I'm talking about years ago, like I'd be anxious and I wouldn't even understand that I was anxious. My wife would be like, "Quit rushing me." It's like I'm not, and it's like, but your energy is. It's because you're rushing
Mm.
yourself. So if
Mm.
you're feeling rushed, how can you be gentle with yourself? Is by allowing yourself to feel the anxiety, but actually slow down. Like nothing bad is going to happen. You're still going to be out the door. You're still going to get to where you're going. Who cares that you might be a couple minutes late or right on time? But being gentle with yourself can actually start to rewrite the story and soften that anxiety around, oh my gosh, it's getting close to the time I need to be gone. And so you can actually start to change the narrative in yourself. So now, as you as you get ready to go somewhere, now you're not feeling the anxiousness you used to have. And it's through being able to slow down, feel what's present, take some deep breaths, and relax yourself, right? So, you understand the nervous system. That anxiousness is like fight, flight, freeze. Well, how can we actually be gentle with ourselves? Well, it's to shift over into relaxation. How can we do that? Through our breath, like softening your body and breathing, you know, and just connect with that, maybe, you know, 30 seconds. Like that 30 seconds isn't going to make you late, you
For
know?
sure.
Um, so learning how to be, and that's just one example.
Yeah.
Learning how to employ these little micro practices, like that deep breath in, soften your
Hmm.
shoulders, soften your body, breathe. That's a little what I call micro practices. 30-second little thing that can help shift us from fight, flight, freeze to relaxation and rest. And so that is, as the adult sitting here, the anxiousness is my belief, the inner child that's anxious, like, because it was rushed. So as the adult, I can sit down with myself, which includes my inner child, and I can breathe. Right? So it's like holding space for myself. Does that make sense if I
Hmm.
worded that?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, absolutely.
and so that's how you can learn how to be gentle with yourself. Just one piece. And there's many tools, many micro practices, many examples, but that's one.
As you were saying that, it's really funny. That was like my whole life was just like being rushed. And I could feel the anxiety thinking about like I'm perpetually late because I have like time blindness and thinking about like my dad and my mom rushing around. Just when you said the energy, right? Sometimes you're not even saying like, hey, we have to go, but the energy is so felt like just frantic or scattered or just like feeling like someone's hovering over you, and just allowing yourself to be like, nothing bad's going to happen, and shifting, right? It's interesting you say these micro practices, because it's not like this one huge thing that you have to do every day, even though you said, some practices to do each day,
Yeah.
but shifting away from constantly being stuck in this fight or flight or freeze mode, right? Because then that's when our body starts to tense up, and that's when things start to get stuck.
Hmm.
So it's like constantly releasing these little bits of stress throughout the day allows us to be more open and present.
Yeah, the micro practices are game changers. Like when you become aware that like, oh, I'm
Hmm.
doing it again. I'm rushing myself, I'm rushing my children. I can slow
Yeah.
down, I can breathe, I can, employ this little 30-second or 1 minute or 2 minute, whatever it is. Um, if you're struggling with um, maybe social anxiety, when you show up somewhere, maybe you're feeling anxious. Well, how can you actually ground yourself in that space? Well, you can sit there, you can take some deep breaths, you can look around, you can take in, you can tap into your senses, your sight, smell, taste, touch, you can tap into all of that. You can feel your body sitting in the chair, and it allows you to relax into the space, which can help with social anxiety. And so depending on what it is you're working on, you can employ these little micro practices throughout your whole day. And that's going to shift
Yeah.
you from uh, fight, flight, freeze to relaxation, dysregulated nervous system to regulating your nervous
Regulated.
system. And
Yep.
then that
Just a lot of grounding techniques.
and that creates spaciousness in you. So after an ayahuasca weekend or ceremony, you've moved energy, you've mentally processed, you've felt emotions that maybe have been suppressed, and now there's spaciousness in you, right? So meaning you feel lighter, you feel clearer. Well, if you don't make any changes, all the things that went out are just going to come right back in. And so that's where little micro practices, you can continue regulating your nervous system, really nourishing your nervous system by giving it the rest and relaxation it needs. The meditation, that the meditation is like opening the, I like to think of our subconscious mind as kind of like a junk drawer in your kitchen, right? Where like you're moving through your whole day and you're just opening it up and you're just throwing stuff
Yeah.
in there. Meditation is you're sitting down, you're opening up the junk drawer, you're taking a little bit of things out, you're organizing a little bit, and you're closing it, right? And so if you can use micro practices to really nourish your nervous system and regulate your
Yeah.
nervous system, and then you're doing something for your subconscious mind through like meditation, like
Hmm.
to me those are like the most powerful tools that a person can walk away with. But that may not be true to everybody. That's what worked for
Hmm.
me. And so obviously if it worked for me, that's probably what I'm going to share with someone else.
Sure.
Uh, so
That makes sense. I really appreciate this. This has been such insightful information and powerful, and you sharing your story. Can you share with people how they can get in touch with you or with Cocoon to work with you, or, learn more about ceremonies or ayahuasca?
yeah, so they can visit our website, which is tikunhealingcenter.org. Um, and then you can, I mean, if it, I tell people not to like try to like Google and watch like all these things because
Yeah.
it can lead a person to maybe freak themselves out.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there is good information out there. You just have to be willing to read through some things that might sound sketchy. People sharing
Sure.
horror stories, and you're going to hear a lot of projection. Um,
Mm.
and so the projection being this. After my first weekend of drinking ayahuasca years ago, I was sitting there, I'm like, oh my God, there is no way my wife could do this. That would be way too intense, right? That'd be way too much. Well, each person is different. Yeah, she's not going to get the intensity that I had because we live two very different lives. So, one thing that I would suggest to any listeners right now would be understand that their stories may sound really, really intense and that might make you afraid. Um, your life is not their life. You may not need that. This medicine is going to bring you to your growing edge. It's not going to push you beyond your capacity. And what I mean by like that, what I mean by that is it's not going to be a traumatic event. Whereas, you're actually coming to heal traumatic events or trauma or, wounds, whatever it is.
Yeah.
You're not going to leave traumatized by ayahuasca. But when you read these stories, you might go, yeah, I can't do that. Just understand that that's their story, not yours. Uh, but yes, they can find, my uh, healing center, tikkun.healingcenter.org. Uh, yeah,
Awesome. That was such a great I'm glad you mentioned that, the differentiation that you're going to go there to heal. The experience will not cause trauma within itself. It might be intense or a lot or scary, but the point is that it's not going to traumatize you.
correct.
So, for listeners, it's okay to be scared, but also know that everyone's journey and experience will be different.
Yeah.
So, that's good to know. Awesome. Alex, thank you so much for being on today. I really appreciate your time and your insight and knowledge. This has been an awesome episode. I can't wait for this to air.
Thank you for having me. It's
Absolutely.
been fun.
So if you've enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and subscribe so we can send the message out there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yay. That was awesome. I'm like, all right, I think I might do it one day.